Good afternoon and welcome to our first annual celebration of the National Day on Writing. I am Shakira Pleasant, Director of UIC Legal Writing Resource Center. We have an exciting and diverse panel of speakers today. As you listen to the presentation and later engage with the panelists, I ask you to consider two questions. First, how does writing serve as a universal form of communication? And second, in what ways do different genres like law, journalism, or creative writing intersect to give voice to our unique backgrounds and experiences? And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce UIC Dean, Darby Dickerson. She is a prolific writer, and without her support, this event would not have been possible. Please join me in welcoming Dean Dickerson.
Thank you, Professor Pleasant, and thank you to the Writing Resource Center for putting this program on, and thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone in the audience for joining us. As many of you may know, I'm the 2020 president of the Association of American Law Schools. Each president selects a theme, and my theme for this year is the power of words. I chose this theme for several reasons. First, lawyers and legal educators are professional communicators. Words are the instruments with which we practice our craft. Second, I'm a legal writing professor, so the theme plays homage to my specific field. And third, words and language make us human. Indeed, many believe communication is the most important skill a person can master. And for good reason. It is estimated that an average person speaks about 16,000 words per day and reads hundreds, if not thousands, of sentences each day. And for lawyers, I think that's probably a lot higher. Words are powerful tools. They can inspire social movements, evoke emotions, and create allegiances. They can help and they can heal. But like many tools, words can be wielded as weapons to hurt and hinder, and to mislead and manipulate. Words translate our imagination. They can form bridges to connect us and walls that divide us. Words can comfort and isolate, empower and belittle. Words are ephemeral, yet can have lasting impact. Consider the Yiddish proverb, a blow passes, but a word remains. And think about the continuing influence of our great founding documents like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, and also the inspiring speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Lincoln. Among the US presidents, Lincoln understood that words were a powerful tool of persuasion. He toiled over his speeches, considering and considering each word he used. His Gettysburg Address, at only 278 words, is viewed as a singular moment in repairing a disjointed union. And the Emancipation Proclamation, with only 703 words, including 505 with only one syllable, ultimately freed 3.5 million enslaved Americans and led Frederick Douglass to declare it as perhaps the greatest document of social reform in American history. Words can create nations, literally. On a trip to Iceland last December, I learned that Iceland gained its independence through peaceful protest and a series of persuasive letters to the King of Denmark. Even small words can have great power. Consider, for an example, an apology. With 3 short words, I am sorry, a past harmful act can be forgiven. Words can also have neuroscientific power. For centuries, many cultures have believed in the spiritual force of language. Consider prayer, confessions, hexes, and curses. Over time, these ideas have moved from the realm of magic and mythology to that of scientific inquiry. Just as an exercise can change our bodies, mental activities such as learning and using language can change the physical structure of our brains. Fearful words like poverty and death have been proven to trigger fight or flight responses in the amygdala. And negative words like no can release stress-producing hormones and neuroreceptors that can interrupt normal brain function. Fortunately, the power of positive thinking has also been validated clinically. The power of words to shape perception has been proven by researchers in controlled experiments. In one study, psychologists Elizabeth Loftus and John Palmer showed subjects a film of two cars colliding. Later, some subjects were asked how fast the cars were going when they bumped into each other, while others were asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. As you might imagine, those who received the smash question indicated that the cars were going faster than those who received the bumped question. As Dr. Deborah Tannen observed, this is how language works. It invisibly molds our way of thinking about people, actions, and the world around us. And the former litigators among us on this call, and maybe the current litigators among us on this call, recall the subtle word choices we considered when developing our cross-examinations and closing arguments. Words in the form of laws give rights and impose responsibility. Those words can separate children from parents, unite two people in matrimony, imprison people for crimes, and even condemn individuals to death. As Professor Emily Hartigan explained in her article, The Power of Language Beyond Words, law is the medium through which we intentionally dispense pain, advantage, freedom, and death. Thank you for listening to my short summary about the power of words, and I'll turn the program back over to the Writing Center, and I look forward to hearing our panelists today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dean Dickerson, for your welcome and your thoughtful remarks. I'm Danielle McCain, the Associate Director of the Writing Resource Center, and I will serve as your moderator for today of this dynamic panel of writing experts. I hope you are looking forward to this conversation as much as I am. I want to just cover a couple of housekeeping things along the way throughout this conversation. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat. Our team members will keep tally of them, and we'll discuss them in the Q&A part of this conversation. And you attendees will be on mute. So again, if there's any questions or anything of that nature, please put that in the chat and our team will address that as well. So without further ado, let's meet our panelists. One of the campaigns for National Day on Writing is #WhyIWrite. So if you were paying attention yesterday for the official date of National Day on Writing, #WhyIWrite was trending on Twitter. So check that out if you did not see it on yesterday. But for our panelists, by way of introduction, will you tell us #WhyYouWrite and some information that you'd like to share with our audience about yourself? We will start with Mark.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this National Day on Writing. Someone asked me if it was the National Day of Writing. No, we're not going to write all day, but we're talking about writing. It's a National Day on Writing. I'm a law professor at the UIC John Marshall Law School, where I've taught legal writing since I started there 28 years or so ago. And I've written a lot of books, and I'm just thrilled to be in this company today, because it's celebrating not only the professional writing, the day-to-day writing that lawyers do, but the writing that moves people. Some of my writing in the early 90s and mid 90s was on the AIDS crisis, on how people with AIDS were suffering from discrimination, and I focused my writing on presenting arguments that would bring equality and non-discrimination for that, and I could see results from that, changing minds one by one, and hopefully changing laws and policies along the way. Words have power, and words are tools as lawyers and as individuals, as thinking members of society.
Leslie?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm LESLE HONORE. I'm By day, I'm the executive director of SEIU's Member Education and Training Center, which focuses on training home care and child care workers in the state of Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, and Missouri. By every other moment of the day and for all of my life, I have been a writer and a poet. Why I write is, one, to remind myself I'm more than the profession that is an advocacy, but is very separated from my creativity. And I write mainly about social injustice and try to give voices to people who are silenced. And so typically that's my largest motivator in writing, to use my platform to bring the stories and the love and the hope, and shine lights in places that are typically silenced, ignored, and sometimes invisible to the majority of people on our planet. And that is why I write, and I'm so excited to be here with everyone today. And that creativity is highlighted in the area that usually is just academic. So really, really glad to be a part of today's panel.
Maureen, tell us why you write.
Hi, I'm Maureen, and I've written ever since I was a little girl, and I think a lot of it was just being in love with words, that it's fun to play with them, it's fun to make them into patterns, it's fun to figure out how to tell stories. Storytelling is fundamental to who we are as humans. It took me a long time to find my right genre. I wrote short stories as a young person, tried a novel and put it in the trunk where it belonged, and discovered that my real path in writing was journalism. And much like Leslie, I see myself as a storyteller, and that my job is to bring stories that people would otherwise not be aware of to their attention, particularly in hopes of making changes that are needed to force equity, or in my case, especially better education for the kids of Chicago.
And last but not least, Loy.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to Dean Dickerson and Danielle for inviting me to this event. For those of you that don't know, I am an alumni of the John Marshall Law School. I graduated in 2012, so it's been a minute, and this is my first event that I've done here post-graduation, so I'm so excited to be here. Although I am an attorney, or what I would call a recovering lawyer, I am a playwright and now a television and film writer. So I've written on a series for AMC, and I'm currently on a comedy series now for BET, and I've had a play called The Light that actually premiered off Broadway. So that is what I do now. I'm a professional writer. But when anybody asks me why do I write, I always say the same thing, and that thing is I write to be a pointer toward hope. And what does that mean? That means regardless of form, regardless of content, whatever it is, I want my writing to be the neon blinking sign in the darkness saying hope this way. And so that's always my tagline when someone asks me, why do I choose to write?
All right, so a couple of you mentioned early experiences with writing or writing as a child. I mentioned this in our conversation prior, that my first writing experience was with a teacher, my second grade teacher, who took a group of us around to share our poetry and put us in these competitions and so on. Introduced me to Gwendolyn Brooks, who was the poet laureate of Illinois at that time. And it really made a strong impression upon me and built my confidence towards writing. So I wanted to ask each of you about what were your earliest experience in writing and how did that impact you? Let's start with LESLE.
My earliest experience with writing and poetry in particular was a talent show, first grade, and my father helping me memorize a poem and recite it. But outside of that, I've always written, I've always read, and I think at some point I got to an idea of thinking, well, if I can read it, I can write it. And often my punishment, if I didn't do my chores, was not being allowed to go to the local library and get my weekly stack of books. So it was my own little revolutionary protest to say, well, you stopped me from reading, but you can't stop me from from writing. I don't ever remember a time in life where I didn't write. And poetry for me was a way to also shut this system and not have to follow grammatical rules or punctuation. I was completely in control. And I think that's something that I've held on to, is the power of being able to express myself in the way I see fit. And when I talk to young writers, especially young poets, I remind them that this is the genre that no one can critique the way they critique other types of writing. They can't critique you on your emotion, on how you share it, on how you feel is best represented. So it's literally something I've always done, and that's my earliest memory of having any connection to writing words and how it made me feel empowered.
Just as an aside, do you recall the poem that you memorized in first grade?
Lady, no, that was 40 years ago.
All right. So Maureen, how about you? I believe you mentioned your early childhood experiences with writing.
Yes. Well, I also wrote poetry very young, but the experience that was probably the best preparation ever for being a blogger was that I got a diary, one of those old lock and key diaries when I was 9. So, and just started going, and it was my safe space and like my refuge as a teenager. There are a lot of cuss words about my parents. But it was great practice. And then something else, one of the downsides of the rise of email is that we don't write old-fashioned letters anymore. I have letters from college. I stayed in touch with friends, and back in the 80s, we wrote actual letters to each other, and I'm glad I still have them. I'll probably send them. I can't remember what university is that is accepting collections of women's letters. And I feel like this is a very important piece of social history that has totally transformed in our lifetimes. So diaries and letters are really wonderful places to just get comfortable as a writer, and they're safe spaces where you're either only writing for yourself or you're writing for one other person. And sometimes when I'm stuck on a story now, I'll imagine I'm trying to explain it to a person and write it out that way, because just having the image of who am I explaining this to can be so helpful.
Mark or Lloyd, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I'll go. My earliest memory of writing was with my grandmother, my father's mom. She would never allow us to watch TV when we went up her house, which we didn't like going over there for that reason. And so she would always say, here's a notepad, sit down and read and write. And she said, write. And she would always say, and I always tell her this and we laugh about it now because it ended up being true. She would always say, like, one day maybe you'll be a writer. And I would look at her like she was crazy, because in my mind, I wanted to be a star. And I didn't think that writers were stars. I'm like, I don't know no writers that are stars. She's crazy. But it was like that moment of being at her kitchen, writing, and me not necessarily knowing what I was saying with the written word, but in my mind, in my imagination, those words. And like I said, I always give her credit for that, because I look back on that statement and me being like, I don't know any writers that are stars. And then I look at all of the women of color who are writing right now in TV and film, Misha Green, Ava DuVernay, Lena Waithe, Tanya Saracho, like all of those women. And I'm just like, I would not, that seed was planted because my grandmother planted that, even though I didn't know at the time what she was doing. So I'm forever grateful for her planting that seed.
Right. And Mark.
That's a great story. I'm going to tell a story I've never told anybody ever. When I was in grade school, I remember going to the library and asking for a book about how to write books. And the librarian looked at me like that they were crazy. Like she didn't know that there were such books about how to write books like that. But I remember that like 6th or 7th grade, I had already in me the desire to write a book, and I wanted to know how to do it.
And you went on to write books. So
I've written some books since then, yeah.
You've written some books here.
Figured it out, yeah.
All right, so Mark, sticking with you, one of my sheroes and our former Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed recently, as we all know, was quoted as saying, never use 4 words when you can use 3. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on what makes good writing generally? What makes good writing?
Justice Ginsburg was a recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from Scribes, the American Society of Legal Writers. I had the honor of being president of Scribes until last week. I'm now immediate past president. Darby Dickerson is another past president and current board member of Scribes. And Justice Ginsburg had so many great things to say about writing, about advocacy, and clear communication. The making something shorter to make it more readable, clear language. I think that's a reflection as well as of Dean Dickerson's comments in the beginning about the importance of words and power and the effect that Abraham Lincoln's writings had, for example. I don't know that I can add anything more to that than what's already been said on that.
Okay, well, moving to a different discipline in writing, from the legal realm to the arts. Loy, why don't you tell us what you think makes good writing?
For me, I remember a piece of advice from playwright Stephen Atlee Gurgis. What he said is, he used to teach a writing workshop, and he would tell people to like write a letter to anybody you choose. And he said that one person in the particular writing workshop, they wrote a letter to a victim of someone they went to prison for. They wrote a letter to like the victim. And he said nobody really connected with the story, because even though on the outside it was dramatic, the person who wrote the letter wasn't really connected to that material. So we didn't feel the connection. And so he said another person wrote a letter to their dog that they didn't take care of, and it eventually like died. And they said like, he said like the hairs on their arms stood up and people were crying because you could tell the connection that they felt to that particular, that dog that they had let die because they didn't take care of it. And so his advice was, write things that are important to you, because if it's important to you, it will be important to someone else. And I feel a lot of times, especially in the creative realm, when you write in TV and film and theater, people write what's hot. So if it's a hot button issue or something like that, and they're not really connected to the material, and the audience, they don't know why they don't feel connected, but they don't feel connected to that. But if you write something that is very important to you, or something that you personally went through, trust me, there are millions of people out there who somebody in that million has went through what you have went through, and they will resonate with that. So I would say, don't write what's hot, don't write what's trendy, don't write what you think is important, write what's important to you.
On that note, and let's just take that a little further. Leslie, you've described your writing, self-described it as unflinching, and I would absolutely agree. So tell us a little bit about how your writing reflects your identity and how it has helped to develop your identity.
Absolutely. Being the daughter of a Black man from New Orleans and a Mexican immigrant from Sinaloa, identifying as Black and brown, and juxtaposing that with our nation. My writing always is informed from my identity. It's always framed through those lenses. I don't know how to separate that. So just right to what Loy's saying, that is what I write from, and what I know. And it's not formulaic, but it's just true that when I write about my experience as a Black and brown woman, when I write about my experience as a mother of Black and brown children, when I'm writing from that lens, that is the poetry that gets attention. Those are the poems that go viral. They get hundreds of thousands of likes and follows, and I'm in awe of, everyday people taking time to read poetry. But we know that writers who write from the gut and the heart and live in that space that floats in between just performance and academic, who are right there in that niche that tells the stories of all of us, even when they're framed from your own personal experience, the thread of human connection and human experience is there. One of my very favorite songwriters is Bill Withers. And what Bill Withers wrote was about everyday life. It was his everyday life. It was his everyday heartbreak as a Black man. But the soul to which he wrote about it is what all of us connect to and still connect to. And there's a Booker T. Washington quote that I actually just came across this morning. And it says, "No race can prosper until it learns that there is as much dignity in tilling the field as in writing a poem." And I like to write the poems about the dignity of tilling the fields, of all of the fields that go unnoticed and uncelebrated. And that's my lane, and I'm proud to be in it. It's even when it's not accepted with open arms, when I get really ugly inbox messages or comments on poetry that are extremely racist and scary and sexist, I still think, but you took the time to read my poem and it moved you. And so I giggle and I laugh and I let the comments stay. So I hope I answered the question.
Danielle, I want to just jump in with remembering the quote that if you want to be informed, read a newspaper. If you want truth, read a poem.
Okay, all right, and feel free to jump in. I'm directing questions, but if you want to add something, this is free flowing, and I want to hear from you more than me. I want to hear you more. So, Maureen, tell us how your writing is reflective of who you are and your identity.
Sure. These days, my identity is very much reflective of my status as a Chicago Public Schools parent. Up until just this August, we actually left the CPS for this year because of COVID and all sorts of issues. But I've been writing for a long time as a parent and also as a resident of Chicago's Back of the Yards neighborhood. I moved here in 2004. Frankly, I was priced out of the North Side and I was trying to find an affordable neighborhood and I didn't want to be a gentrifier. So I knew folks down here from my reporting on schools. I knew the local parish, and I am Catholic. And so I felt like I had a home in a way here, and came down and visited and saw some houses that had been rehabbed by a nonprofit housing agency. And there was one up the street from the local principal's house. She's like, "There's one right there." I was like, "Oh, wow." So I started a blog about my neighborhood called the Marshfield Tatler. I got some notice in the Chicago Tribune, and mostly what I did was just watch all the kids on the block and make up new names for them and tell you all about them. And they were just an amazing group of young people, some of whom are now teachers. They're all doing different things, and just their struggles. Many were from mixed status or undocumented families. Others were from families struggling with parents who are incarcerated. It was just life. You know, it's just life on a block in a part of Chicago that most people only see in the news for gang shootings. And it got some attention, and it was a shift for me from strictly journalistic writing to more storytelling in the moment. And that was an important thing. So a lot of friends know that in my writing, I like to rep my hood.
Okay. So one of the things that we emphasize in the Writing Resource Center is the fact that writing is a skill that can be developed. We don't all just end up being these excellent writers. And I wanted to direct this question to Loy to start off with, because you are an attorney.
Yeah.
You at one point were a theater journalist, and I want you to tell us exactly what that is.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah.
And then now playwright and screenwriter. You've gone Hollywood on us, so to say. in LA now.
Mhm.
But tell us a little bit about your journey and the skills that you developed throughout those different types of writing experiences. And also maybe you can talk about what skills you found were transferable and that are a little bit more universal.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Y'all, my resume is so scattered in terms of writing. Like I've done like a lot of things in this regard, but I'll talk about sort of explain my journey and how, like, when Danielle talks about like writing is a skill that you could learn. I feel like you can't teach someone heart in terms of writing, like heart, like what Leslie was talking about, that emotion and that raw, like material that you have that makes your writing, but you can teach someone skill. And I feel like where the great writer becomes is when they're able to merge heart and basically skill. And so my journey being a playwright, I'll start about that journey, is that I always knew that I wanted to do something in entertainment. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I had a father who was like, you're going to law school, because that was his dream for his children. Me and all my sisters have the initials law. I am the oldest. And so he was like, this is like for you. So I was like, I don't know how I can merge these two things. And then I remember when I was a junior in undergrad, I found out about this actor. His name is Hill Harper, and he was a lawyer. He went to Harvard Law School, and then he went to pursue his dream of being like an actor. And I was like, oh, that is what I can do. So when I came, my journey brought me back to Chicago to go to, it was John Marshall at the time. UIC wasn't a part of it. It was just John Marshall in 2009. And I remember I was a little depressed because those law students out there and lawyers out there, that first year of law school can be kind of tough. That transition, the competition, like all that stuff, it can be really tough. And I said I needed to go see a play. And the University of Chicago has a theater called Court Theater. And I saw a play called MAUREEN, which they're actually turning into a film that's going to be on Netflix. And I was transformed by that play. I remember walking out of there saying, I want to be a writer. I know what it is that I want to do. I want to be a writer. And I went to Harold Washington Library, which is right across the street from John Marshall before I went to school. And I got every single August Wilson play. And I said, this is what I am going to learn to do. And so where did theater journalism came from? I was in law school. It's no way I'm not about to drop out. I'm about to get this degree, not just for myself, but for my father too. And so what I said was, I found this paper called New City. It's an arts paper. And what they do is I asked them, like, how can I write for this particular paper? Because I noticed that they interview theater practitioners, and they also like review plays. And they said, in order for you to like write for this paper, you have to review a play. And so I said, that could be my Yale School of Drama. I can go reviewing plays. And so that's what I did for 4 years of my life, because I was in school, and I was also like, once I graduated, I was also, trying to find jobs and stuff like that. And you just can't wake up one day and say, I want to make a living off of being a writer. And so I use that as my training ground, seeing plays. And actually, what they teach you in law is like, okay, like you have the case law, you have the cases, and then you have like the test. And I always did that in terms of transferring that in terms of learning about the principles of like writing, is that you have like the rules of what writing is, you see it illustrated in the plays, that would be the case, and then the test is you writing. And so I literally use that as transferring to how I learned how to write. And so the skills that you learn in law, like a lot of people, when they were reviewing my plays, my play The Light, when it went off Broadway and also had a run in Chicago, people were like, how I structure my arguments, they could sort of tell that I was a lawyer, because you learn those skills in like legal writing and stuff like that. And so you don't really know how valuable the skills are until you actually put them to use. And the skills that you learn in the legal world in terms of writing transfer to all types of mediums. So if there's any law students or lawyers out there who want to actually try anything, it's a matter of just learning how to transfer those skills into other mediums.
Maureen, just to kind of piggyback on the conversation around the journey, you started off as a classroom teacher and then transitioned to being a journalist. Can you talk a little bit about that journey as well as the skills that you see that are universal across disciplines?
Sure. So I had always been interested in writing and been a writer. And then I got to college and I had the opportunity to go to Yale University, which was a great experience. But I felt like I'd gone from a big fish in a small pond to a tiny fish in the ocean. And I lost a lot of confidence at that point in myself as a writer. I kind of felt like I cannot compete, even though I did have the opportunity as a senior to take one of Yale's most famous writing courses, Daily Themes, which was like a really great opportunity. But, you know, all those voices about, you know, it's hard to make it as a writer, you got to make a living. Da, 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 da. And I've always enjoyed students and I've always loved teaching, and it looked like a career path. So that is where I started. But I had the opportunity to take a break from teaching and spend time in France, which is when I attempted writing a novel. And I figured out, I don't really like to sit in a room all day making things up. This is not the kind of writing that works for me. And I said, what do I want to do? And I said, you know, maybe journalism. So I came back from France. I started working as a copy editor for Streetwise. Streetwise was pretty new at that time, and a lot of journalists were volunteering as copywriters to help get the publication off the ground. So copy editors. So I would like go in and like read the stuff and correct the grammar. I taught high school English. So I was somebody who always liked the architecture of language. I am in full support of like, everybody needs to make language their own and their own tool. But when it comes down to like, you know, you're trying to like follow the conventions for a published piece of journalism or whatever, I'm like, yes, I can help you do that. So I would read all this stuff. And eventually people realized I was, you know, I knew my stuff and I probably was a pretty good writer. And they were like, would you like to write some covers for us? So I got to write some cover stories. Like I wrote about a local jazz musician and different things. And then because I knew the teaching world and particularly the alternative school world, there was a big dust up over funding for schools that are dropout recovery programs. And I broke this story in Streetwise, and that got the attention of some folks at the Chicago Reporter and its sister paper Catalyst, which is how I eventually transitioned from teaching to writing full time. But I stick to what I know as a writer, and that's schools. And I'm very deep in like trying to tell stories from schools and to help people think about policy that makes schools really work. And so that's where I really apply my writing talents.
Okay. Well, thank you. Mark, we are 13 days out from an election. And of course, we cannot have this conversation, or we shouldn't have this conversation without really thinking about the landscape that we're in right now. 13 days out from election. We're in a pandemic. There are all kinds of fights for social justice and civil rights and so on that are all around us at this point. I wanted to get your take on activism, advocacy, and using that as a tool in your writing. And I also want the other panelists to talk about that as well.
I would say two things. I know that a lot of people watching right now are watching because they are writers and potential full-time future writers, and that they are looking for guidance and hints about how to make the transition to a career in writing. There's no better time to write than to have something to think about like this. All of these things you mentioned, this is something you need to write about. Just write for yourself, or write for your kids or your family or your friends. Just put your feelings about today and the election day and what this means. Write that down, even if it's not fully developed. Just write your thoughts on it, and the fragments you can work with later. And another kind of writing that I think people need to do is write to a politician. You know, get a letter, write to a politician. It doesn't matter which one it is, just once a week, write a letter to somebody and let them know your thoughts about what's happening, how to put the country back together, how to heal these deep divisive wounds that are really ripping us apart, and we'll make it through if we can talk with each other, if we can have the conversation, if we can listen and learn from each other, and that would be my thoughts.
Okay. Leslie?
So there are many artists who have said, and anybody correct me if I get this wrong, but I do believe it was Toni Morrison who said it's these times that the artist is called to create, to ensure that the voice that we hear are the real voices and not the voices that want to shape and mold what history will remember. So this is the time to create. This is the time to express, to record for yourself, for your children's children, your friends' children. We cannot allow history to be recorded without our voices. And to piggyback on what Mark is saying, just put it down. And again, that's why I love poetry, because it can be a fragment, it can be a thought. It doesn't have to start with a capital, end with a punctuation. It could just be a couple of words. But to do that, and it helps us process. We are living through a double pandemic. It's so much of it are echoes of things that we haven't corrected, that we have continued to let continue and cycle through. And not to be afraid to express yourself. My writing is highly politicized. It's my opinion. Some people share them, some people don't. But I'm gonna write about it. And it's the way your soul breathes and thinks and talks and has a moment to process. I can't think about it in context of whether or not this is going to be received well, or am I going to sell a book because of it, or am I going to connect with someone because of it? I do it because I have to, and I think we all have those pieces of us, whether it's writing or another form of expression. You do it because that's a part of you that you can't let die. And in times like this, it is so very essential that you just don't tap into that, but you create space for it. Because one of the things I've learned is when you create space for it in yourself, it helps other people around you to create spaces too. And that is so important.
Leslie, how often do you write, or when do you write?
So first, Mark, if we're going to be best friends, I need you to say my name right, and it's LESLE. Zoom has not become good on putting accents up. Okay, now we can have matching friendship bracelets. I write all the time. I used to carry a small journal around, as many poets, I think, in the 90s did. Like that's how you knew you were a real poet, is you always had a journal or notebook and a pen. But now with a cell phone and my notes app, I'm always writing. If it's a thought, an idea, a one word. And typically my poems come really quickly. Sometimes it's at a red light. Oftentimes, to be frank, it is in the bathroom with closed doors where my kids and my dog can't get to me. But being able to write mobily helps. Sometimes I'll be at work in a meeting, but just to continue to talk about this time that we're in, it's so much inspiration. Every day it's something new to write about, something new that I'm feeling and I know other people are feeling. So I at least a poem a day. Not everything I share, but sometimes more. It's always there.
Leslie has shared her work on Instagram, and I'm a follower now of your work, maybe a little bit of a groupie. But your work around Breonna Taylor has just captured every feeling that I thought that I had and could feel. So, we'll make sure that all of the attendees can get your information for Instagram and where to find your work. But I just wanted to say that it has really resonated with me, and I have not been able to fully express myself, but I could go to your poetry and say, yeah, that is it. That is exactly how I'm feeling. Okay, we are now going to move to Q&A so that we can hear from our audience and get some of their questions out there.
So Danielle, a lot of the questions that have been placed in the chat have already been answered, but I'm going to list a couple that just came in. So the first question is from, hold on, excuse me. The first question is, what advice would you give young writers who are majoring in mass communications and English on how to pursue their dreams of writing, and also how to publish their own creative work?
I'll start because I think that questioner was also interested in journalism. A bunch of things have been percolating here. Journalism as a field has evolved a lot. I mean, a lot of people are very concerned about like the decline of journalism and the decline in positions as like formal reporters. But at the same time, there's this explosion of new media, digital content. I think more important than major is like, young folks are digital natives. You all could just get out there and play in the space, you know, put your stuff out there the way LESLE is doing. Yes. I hope I got that right. Putting it on Insta, you know, put your stuff out, start your blog, use your Twitter. If you original voices, and I mean, there's so much of journalism that's analysis now. Like if your love is reporting, and mine is, I am old school. I like old school shoe leather reporting. I like to go out and be in a place and talk to people. Obviously that's super hard to do right now in the pandemic. But there's a huge demand for original voices with a take on the events of the day. And if you have that voice, it doesn't matter how old or young you are. It doesn't matter how established or not established you are. Like that voice is precious and it can really cut through a lot of stuff. So that's what I would say. Just do it. Like whatever, from whatever location you are, start doing and making the connections and it will grow.
And I don't know if anyone else has a comment, but actually, Maureen, that was a great segue to the next question in the chat, which is, how often do you all write and how much of it makes it to the public versus what you write for yourself?
I would say that a lot of your writing is not going to make it to the public because a lot of it is bad. And I feel like that's what a lot of people don't tell you. When you read books or you see stuff on your television screen, that stuff has went through so many drafts. So do not be fooled by that. And I think a lot of times, like as a newbie, when you're first starting out, like you read something like, oh my God, it's great. Trust me, if you read draft 1, it will look nothing like draft 100. So I feel like give yourself permission to fail, give yourself permission to be bad, and learn that the way you get from bad to where you really want to be is through continuing to write, continuing to learn, continuing to read. I think that's the most important. A lot of people want to write, but they don't read. And you can't learn the structure of anything. You can't learn the possibilities of what you can do if you don't read in that medium. If you want to do television and film, you need to watch as many films and television shows as you can to learn what is that structure, because the more you watch it, you'll begin to get like the structure. And so I would say like practice makes perfect, regard of anything. If you're an athlete, you just don't wake up being the greatest athlete. You got to do practice, and it's the same in regards to writing. In regards to how often I write, I know a lot of writers are like, I get up every day, 4 a.m. and I write and do stuff like that. I say, if you can just do a sentence a day, a page a day, do whatever is manageable for you in your time, but consistency is the most important thing. And I feel like if consistency becomes a habit, it'll become easier for you to write. And for me, I'm a great procrastinator. So if I have a due date, I'll start writing like closer to the due date, which is a bad thing to do, but it's such a hard task to sit down and write. But actually, when you sit down and write, it comes. But I would say to anyone else out there, don't copy that. To make it a consistent habit every day, just small. You don't have to write a novel in one day, just a small page a day, a paragraph a day, or something like that. Manageable chunks.
And for some people, it's not the amount, but maybe a time. Like you say, I'm going to write for 15 minutes. And maybe in 15 minutes you do a page, maybe you do a sentence, but at some point you do that, and 15 minutes could turn into half an hour, and an hour as the day allows you. But one other thing that I found is that sometimes I'm writing, and then I figure out that I have cleaned out my ideas, and now it's time to write it again. So I'll start from a blank document and rewrite it. I'll have the material ready for me to reference if I need it, but I'll just write it again from scratch, and it goes much cleaner, and it comes out to be a better product the second time around.
Okay, so I have a question posted in the Q&A. This question is, how do I get involved in creative writing in college? And then we have one last question in the chat that I think we'll end with.
In terms of creative writing, I would say just take the course. I was a political science major in undergrad. I found time to take theater courses. Just take the course, you know what I mean? And now, since everything is digital, there are also like other platforms that offer digital courses that's not like a whole semester course in college. It's just like a couple of weeks or something like that at writing, different creative writing centers and like all that type of stuff. So I would say Google those and find some of those as well.
Also be participatory in being in the audience for expressions of creative writing, whether it's an open mic or even a panel like this where we're discussing writing. There's so many platforms and venues to get your feet wet that you're just staying, in the current of it. Just do it. I mean, the more you do it, the more you find your tribe that will encourage you to do it more.
Thank you, everyone. And the last question as we get ready to end today is, do you ever become so overwhelmed with life that you cannot write? And if so, how do you deal with this challenge and begin to create again?
I'm going to jump in here because I've had a couple of really significant life experiences with this. When I was a magazine reporter in 2000, my father died. And I chose to take 4 months off. I was very fortunate to be in a place where there was like an emergency 6-month leave that you could take whenever you needed. I took it off because I really couldn't listen to anybody else's stories at that point with grief. I went home and I actually worked as a substitute teacher because that was a job I could go in and do and just be in the moment all day and then walk out and drop and not have to think about it anymore. And it was a great distraction from grief and also like very different than reporting. Like I just didn't have the brain in the game to be like taking in people's stories, analyzing the information, like divining the truth from like 5 different sets of information. That wasn't where my head was at. But where my head was at, I wrote a lot in that time, and I've actually never shared it with anyone. A little bit with my family. I wrote a lot of family stories and anecdotes down, a lot of remembrances of my dad. And when I came back, I actually did some of my best journalistic work for having taken the break. So, if something's telling you now's not the time to write, sometimes it's okay to take that break or switch genre. I would say, like, especially if you're already established and you're writing really hard in one kind of writing and you hit a wall, that's a good time to stop and try a different genre.
I'm gonna hop in. A decade ago, I was married. And I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I spent a decade of not writing. And what I know now is that no matter how difficult something is that I'm living through, that I cannot quiet that part of me. And so there's never a time when I don't write. It is the way I process. It's the way I come back to it. If I'm feeling like I can't, I evaluate why I think I can't, and I write about that. And it's often just to get the thoughts out of my head and put them down on something that I can come back to later. But what I know was a piece of me died in that decade. And I will not let that death happen again. So it's like exercise that I hate to do. I don't like exercising. I like cooking and eating and binge watching my favorite shows. But you do it because you have to, and then it becomes just a part of what you do. And so you just keep doing it. Sometimes you just have to dig in and know that that is the part of you that you need to tend to, is the part that sometimes we want to shy away from when things get too difficult.
And one more thing I'll just like add on that, because I know like at the beginning of the pandemic, I had like some deadlines for some projects. And I had to take time to tell them I can't do this right now, because I feel like a lot of times we live in a culture where everybody's like, well, if you're not working, then you're not doing anything, you're not productive. And you as a writer, you are not a factory. So you're not a factory where you have machines putting out the work input. You are the creative well. And if your well is not full, you're not going to outpour quality work. And so sometimes never be afraid, like both the ladies were saying, to like take a break and say, I can't do this right now. Your mind can always be active with thoughts and ideas and having stuff. And you can also write and not present it to the public or anything like that, but also don't feel pressure from people who say you are not productive if you don't write, to write if you are not emotionally and physically well.
The coronavirus has given us a great big pause button on life, and it's okay to just relax and take the time now to deal with that. We're kind of like cell phones. If you could just keep using it, at some point you're going to run out of energy. You have to recharge it. And as Dean Dickerson will tell you, that you get a faster recharge if you're not doing anything at the time. You just focus on recovering yourself. If you can't write, you can always read. And I think that what I like to say is that if books cost what they were worth, no one could afford them. I think I just want to point out some of our chat messages aren't visible to the attendees, so that there was one that this recording will be available on the website for the Writing Resource Center.
Okay, yes, and that is true. We will have it available. There were questions, and that concludes our Q&A, but there have been comments about where we can find your work, your poetry, your writing. And I want to drop that in the chat now so that our attendees and participants will have that information, because it is worth for sure checking out. So let's put that in the chat. We have a few moments if you wanted to make any kind of, the panelists wanted to make any kind of announcements or anything like that about upcoming events, please do. I see Leslie, let's start with you.
Really quickly to what Mark was saying, if you can't write, then read. And I would say, to follow up on that, if you can't read, listen. I think what got me through a lot of not being able to read something when I was having difficult moments was listening to Audible. By no way is this a pitch for Audible, but it's just my go-to with my credits once a month. And we forget that a lot of written work is meant to be listened to. It is the oral traditions of almost every group of people on the face of the earth, is to share stories orally, to hear them. So if you just hit that wall, sometimes just listening to your favorite book just helps you get over that hump. I'm on social media, all platforms. It's just my government name, no fancy poet name. I'm a staunch believer in that. Tomorrow night, I have a really great project in partnership with Arts and Public Life called Spinning Home Movies. They have been collecting home movies from Southsiders, 8mm movies that go back into the 1920s, 1930s. And they've been inviting artists to come, go through the archives and put together a 20-minute collection of the films. Typically they've used DJs or musicians. I'm the first poet that they asked to participate. So I was able to go through the archives, put some amazing films of real people in real life together, and then to be able to put my poetry to it. A good friend of mine, Rob McKay, who is just a talented music creator, was curated the music. And so that's tomorrow night at 7 p.m. If you go to any of my social media, you'll be able to register for it. It's on Crowdcast, so you can watch it from your home in your living room with pants with some wine and cheese or burgers and fries. But I'm really, really excited. The other iterations have been very upbeat and lively. And in this particular series, I wanted to explore what Black Life Mattering really is about. And so the majority of the film are babies, and just reminding people that Rekia Boyd, George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, those were someone's babies at one time, precious, and invoking all of those feelings that we see with children. And I really wanted to be a juxtaposition of the harshness that my poetry can sometimes be a vehicle for, and these amazing videos of families. So I hope you guys can all join us. It's completely free, $99. You just have to register. And then you can find my book on Blurb, or also the links for it on my social media pages. Thank you again for inviting me to join this conversation. It was an honor.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, all of you. Maureen, did you have something that you wanted to share?
Sure. If you're interested in the question of how we could be doing remote learning better for kids in the Chicago Public Schools, on Thursday at 4 o'clock, the Chicago Unheard Facebook page will be holding a Facebook Live. I'll be moderating a discussion with Nate Pietrini from High Jump. They do amazing work to help low-income kids in middle school with academic enrichment, and like help them move on to like high-ranked high schools and colleges. They had a really successful remote learning experience this summer with kids who are hard to reach and have the kinds of tech hurdles that we've all been hearing so much about. And our other guest will be Angela Haber from the Hyde Park Neighborhood Club. HPNC is they're running pods. There's about 50 students that are like doing remote learning in person with support right now. And we'll be talking about why isn't the district doing more stuff like that, and how could the district's remote learning be better structured to give the on-site folks who understand SEL and student team building an opportunity to put those skills to work to support kids while they're doing remote learning. So if you're interested in that, that is on Thursday at 4 o'clock. Two things real quick. One is you can find Chicago Unheard at the blog link that's in the chat. And if any of you have a stake in the game, have skin in the game in Chicago Public Schools, we are looking for writers and commentators. We generally do not pay, but if you want to break into print and you have standing to talk about stuff as a student, alumnus, parent, community person, and you have something to say, please reach out to me. I am Maureen KELLEHERr on Facebook and KELLEHERr Maureen on Twitter. You can also hit the share my story button on the Chicago Unheard website. And we'd love to hear your stories and help you get them out there. Thank you.
Loy, Mark, any?
I don't have any thing to promote. I'm writing on a television show now, which will premiere later in the summer. But if you want to find me, just type my name in any social media, and it should come up, and you can keep up with me there.
And we will keep up with you too. So.
And I just wanted to thank all of the college students, especially who are watching, all of the mass communication majors, the political science majors, the English majors. You're all pre-law to me. See you in class. Be prepared. I'm going to call on you.
Perfect. All right. Well, I want to thank our panel. You all have been, I knew you would be outstanding, but my mind's just completely blown with just the conversation, the richness and the depth of the conversation that we've had here today. It's such a great way to kick off this, what we hope will be an annual event, and celebrate National Day on Writing, and lift up and amplify writing as the essential skill that all of us need to have, and it's important. So I just want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank our audience for sharing in this conversation, and we look forward to seeing you all next year. For any comments or feedback, please reach out to us, or further questions. The link for the Writing Resource Center email, or the email address rather, has been placed in the chat, so you can reach out to us and just share. But that concludes our program, and it's been amazing. Thank you all so much. And that's the end.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. See you back here next year.